Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Cybersecurity. There's a lot of it about, and it comes in a lot of forms, and I want to quickly run through quite a lot of the sort of attacks. There's a lot of different cyber attacks, and I want to go through quickly a number of the sort of ways in which people attack, why they attack, and how it's possible to defend against them, because real professional programmers don't write code that is vulnerable to these sort of attacks. Obviously, a lot of attacks are focused on stealing money. A lot of attacks are focused on taking data, mostly so that it can be sold online and used in other attacks. Sometimes the data is used for blackmail. We talked a bit in an earlier lecture about the Ashley Madison attack. This has caused all sorts of trouble. People have been blackmailed, marriages have been ruined, some people have committed suicide. Ransomware is increasingly common now. You get some Trojan code or an infection on your computer, it encrypts all your data, and they then hold you to ransom, charging you money for the key to decrypt it. Generally set at a fairly low level. They just demand payment. This is CryptLocker. They typically ask for $200 or $300 or euros. And a lot of people pay up because it's less hassle than trying to sort the problem out. Sometimes they claim they're the police and say that your computer's got illegal material on it, and they threaten you with prosecution if you don't pay up. Sometimes they say they're the US Department of Justice or the FBI. It's not just something that infects individuals. There's a number of hospitals in the US that have suffered from ransomware attacks, and because their medical files have become encrypted, it's actually caused significant disruption. There have been also other attacks on a lot of hospitals now, particularly American ones, stealing medical records, which are then sold on the internet and used for various nefarious purposes. There's some hope of criminal prosecution. It's not a massive deterrent because too often the attacks are from overseas, and it's quite hard to arrest the prisoners because even though there are multilateral agreements between different law enforcement agencies, it's actually really quite difficult to operate those agreements effectively, and they only exist with certain countries in any case. In the UK, the main act that makes all this illegal is the Computer Misuse Act. And it's an interesting act because it makes it clear that it's the attempt to get illegal access to a computer that is actually the crime. It doesn't have to be a specific computer, a specific application, or for a specific purpose, and it doesn't even have to be for you. And you can, on summary conviction in a magistrate's court, get a year in prison for this. Lots of attacks, of course, start with emails. Phishing attacks and spear phishing attacks. Emails to trick you into going to a website that's going to do something horrid to you, or to opening an attachment that has got some Trojan code in it, and we'll come back to Trojan code in a bit. These phishing emails are often quite easy to spot, but they're getting harder because the criminals are getting better. Firstly, they're learning to write decent English. Secondly, they're now trying to avoid the dear customer approach and addressing you directly, and quite often targeting people very specifically. People in finance departments have been getting emails purporting to come from their chief executive or their finance director, instructing them to make an urgent payment to a new supplier, to a new account. And because The emails have got company logos, they've got the right structure, they're from the right person, and they're to the right person. Actually, a lot of those get acted upon before it's realised that this is a scam. And of course, once the money's gone, you can't get it back because the criminals move it very rapidly to another country. That's made ever so much easier by social media. People, unfortunately, say where they work, what their job is on LinkedIn, for example, and that makes it very much easier for people to find the right people to approach, to work out what company they are, to get the details of the company from the website, find out who the CEO is. He may be on LinkedIn as well, he or she, and to therefore craft something that is targeted specifically at you as an individual in your particular role. So phishing, spear phishing emails are getting quite a lot easier to craft and therefore somewhat harder to avoid. This is a typical phishing email. This is one I got recently. It was your PayPal account is about to expire, or you need to do something about it. Lots of classic things wrong with it that tell you if you hover over the update button in the middle there, then you can see in the bottom of your email client that actually it's going off to some bizarre web address that's clearly not legitimate. Up here, the L of PayPal is actually not an L at all. It's a 1. They've chosen an appropriate font so that that's not clearly visible, but that's there so that the spam detection doesn't pick it up too readily. The message implies urgency. It's a dear customer rather than being addressed to an individual. Bad spelling and grammar. All the usual things that show you that actually this is a false email. If you expand the full headers of the email in your email client, you can actually see quite often where it's come from. This one has come from the House of Auto Styling, which is a mobility scooter organisation in Australia. It's clear that they haven't sent it. I'm not suggesting for a second that they've done it deliberately. And I went and had a look at their website. These are the people, and I notified them, but I haven't heard anything back. But chances are that the reason how this has happened is that they've been infected and have become part of a botnet, of a network of computers controlled by a criminal, a bot master, who's controlling a number of command and control computers, each of which is controlling a very large number of infected computers. And these botnets can be big. They can be tens or sometimes even hundreds of thousands of infected computers. And they're used for sending spam. Most of the spam that is generated is actually being generated by botnets now. They get rented out to criminals to carry out all sorts of other things, like distributed denial of service attacks, where you flood the target computer with a lot of messages, knocking it offline, disabling it, distracting the IT department while you do something else, for whatever reason. They're used for click fraud, where people make money by actually clicking through to advertisements and getting paid by the advertiser for what appears to be legitimate access to adverts. But it, obviously, when there's money around, people can construct frauds around it. The infected machines can be used as proxy sites for committing other crimes like child pornography. They can be used for computationally intensive activities like doing Bitcoin mining and generating money that way, used for downloading keyloggers and other malware which other criminals may want. Because once you've got a network of infected computers, some of those are going to be in key areas and people will be very interested in being able to access them. So botnets are big money. Botnets are big money. And they get created by installing some Trojan code, the botnet software initially, which then connects to a command and control machine, and then engages in a regular update with that machine. It may be very infrequent, but nevertheless it's enough to actually keep the whole botnet alive. And the command and control computer will be one of many, and they will swap around in order to try and make it more difficult to detect and control and take down. So botnets are a key part of this. It's highly likely that there are people in this room whose computers are part of botnets, because they're so widespread, and it's so difficult to tell why your computer is accessing the internet, because most of the software you download seems to believe it's got the right to go off and look for updates and do all sorts of things. So it's actually really quite a challenge to know whether you've been infected in this way. Other cyber attacks often involve hijacking accounts, web accounts, email accounts. And of course, the easiest way to do that is to guess the password. It is astonishingly weak passwords that people use. I mean, if you're using any of these, please change your passwords. And please don't use the same password on multiple accounts. In particular, don't use on an important account, like an online banking account, a password that you're also using on a relatively weak account, because you weaken the security of all the accounts using that password down to the security of the weakest protection that you've got. So there's those. And it's worth remembering that all real words can actually be found by a brute force password dictionary attack, simply by running a dictionary of words against a password file. And I explain more detail of how that's done in the transcript. Of course, stolen and reused passwords, if somebody has broken in and stolen your password from one site and you've reused it, then it makes it very easy to access your other sites. And millions of passwords are stolen. And this was just yesterday. This was published, but that's millions of Minecraft passwords, and many people using Minecraft will have used the same passwords elsewhere, no doubt. Hackers also get information by intercepting passwords. This is remarkably easy. You go into, you're walking through a town, you see Joe's Cafe, it's got a nice seat outside, you sit down outside with your laptop and you set up a Wi-Fi point, a Wi-Fi network called Free Wi-Fi for Joe's Cafe customers. And the other customers in the cafe think, oh, that's useful. And over a period of time, some of them log in and they start using all sorts of different websites on that Wi-Fi network. Meanwhile, you're logging the whole thing using a standard network analyzer like Wireshark, which is a perfectly legitimate piece of software, freely available, widely used, but gives you the ability to analyze the network, look at the computers that are on it, capture the traffic, and so on. And then there's Trojan code, which is a jolly good reason to make sure you always know what your software is and where it came from. Trojan code is just software that contains illegitimate actions hidden inside legitimate or seemingly legitimate software. It may be a Microsoft Word file that somebody sent you that's got a macro in it that is doing something that it should not be doing, and which it will do when you open the file or when you carry out some action upon that file. It may be a rogue website that is actually giving you some Java to run on your computer as part of the normal activities of a website. Lots and lots of websites run Java or JavaScript. And potentially, that software is capable of doing significant harm. It may be a free game that somebody has put up in one of the app stores or made available to you, passed it across to you on a USB stick, sent you a link to somewhere where you can get this exciting new game. It may run perfectly well as a game, but you don't know what else it's doing. It may be have a keylogger inside it. It may be turning you into part of a botnet and connecting to other systems. Any software that you download may have these characteristics. So it is important to be aware of the risks and treat software downloads with a degree of caution as a consequence. This is a super source of important information for professional web developers, web application developers. It's the Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP. And they've got a wonderful set of descriptions of the most common cyber attacks. It's well worth looking at them because they explain in some detail how they work, what they are, and what you can do to protect yourself against them if you're developing software, how you can write systems that are not going to be exposed to these attacks. That's the latest top 10. It's a 2013 top 10. And as you can see, the most popular, the most common attack is an injection attack. And I'll come on to one example of injection attacks in just a minute and show you how they work. But these are the top 10, and it's worth going to the website. References are in the transcript as usual, and having a look at some of the others. I'll show you some of the detail of how the OWASP site gives you more information about these things as I go through the SQL injection. That's their top-level description, that what is meant by an injection attack is that you trick some program that is interpreting a scripting language or something similar on your computer, such as, for example, something that is going to be interpreting the structured query language, SQL, database access language. But there are many, many other interpreters that run and which you can trick in the same sort of way, operating system shells, for example, but lots and lots of different programs that actually have that sort of interface where they take text and they interpret it to mean something and then act upon it. And an injection attack is tricking that interpreter into running something that you've supplied that is illegitimate, that is different from what the application developer intended to happen. And it's common, and the typical impact can be really severe. You can lose an entire database of information either by having it destroyed or corrupted or copied. You can have the computer on which the application is running taken over because it's possible to use this approach to get complete control over the target computer. This is, again, the description of the OWASP site that, again, gives you more information about how these sort of attacks work. And here's just a really trivial example. Suppose we have a web page that asks for a username, and I type in my surname, Thomas. What the web page does, because it's now going to look me up in a database, is to drop my name into an SQL line that actually selects my record out of the database. So it drops my name into there, in that line of SQL, my name gets slotted in. And it's perhaps, if it's not being sanitized, if the programmer isn't doing any checks, that's just a copy of some text without any consideration of what the text is. It's just an assumption that it's my name. Now, if I put my name in as this rather bizarre sequence of characters, what happens is that you end up with this as the query. And that quote closes off the username, the semicolon ends that SQL statement, and now you can run another SQL statement, because the interpreter may very well simply carry on reading and be perfectly happy to accept a series of statements. And then the two minuses at the end are a comment indicator, so they turn that closing quote, which was the original one from here, into a comment, and therefore it doesn't cause a syntax error, and therefore the program continues to run perfectly happily. But what's it done? It's dropped the user table. In other words, it's deleted that table from the database. So this simple example just destroys the database. You can see that you can use other SQL commands to carry out other actions on the database. For example, selecting all users and gaining their information and having it displayed or copied, or changing everybody's passwords, for example. If you want to look at details of the sort of things that happen, the rapid7.com website, which has got some very useful tools on it that are used by people who are doing cybersecurity testing of systems, penetration testers, and I'll come back to that. They have a lot of information, but in particular, in this context, they've got an injection cheat sheet, as they call it, which gives you lots of examples of the kind of commands that you can run and how you can insert them into application strings in order to create particular effects on databases. So, and this is, remember, just one example of an injection attack. There are lots of different ways in which you can carry out this sort of attack. It doesn't have to be with this sort of syntax. Anywhere where there is an interpretation going on, you may be able to find a way of tricking the interpreter into doing the wrong thing. And this problem is so well known, it's become an internet joke. And this is just a standard joke off the jokes website. And as you can see, did you really name your son Robert, close quote, semicolon, drop table student, semicolon? Oh yes, little Bobby Tables, we call him. I think it does indicate just how well known the attack is, which makes it pretty shaming that apparently that's how the attack on TalkTalk occurred, that it was an SQL injection attack, in fact done at the same time as a distributed denial of service attack using a botnet, which of course distracted the attention of the IT department and made it much harder for them to cope with the fact that the theft of user data was also going on. And the OWASP website gives recommendations to developers as to what you should do to make sure that your software isn't actually vulnerable to these sort of attacks. And of course, good software developers will actually be following these guidelines, and a lot of software will already be sanitized. I certainly hope that the CyberLiving website is. Please don't try these attacks. It would be a violation of the Computer Misuse Act, and you'd end up with 12 months in jail. So the other attack that I want to describe in some detail is the buffer overflow attack, because this is very common and much more serious even than you will think at first sight, because as I will say again at the end of this section, it's an attack that can be used wherever there is a digital data input to a system. So, for example, you can use it to attack a DAB radio. It's all sorts of systems that you wouldn't think of immediately as being vulnerable to a buffer overflow attack can be attacked using these sort of methods. Now, the trivial way that it works is illustrated by something that will be familiar to any of you who are programmers. That you're copying a string. So you perhaps use the built-in function. The manual says quite clearly what we're doing is copying from source to destination. In the programming language C and its derivatives, a string is just an array of characters, a sequence of characters terminated by a null character. So it's of no known length. You just have to read down it until you find the null character, and then it stops. And this copies from source to destination. And as it says quite rightly, to avoid overflows, the destination had better be at least as big as the source. Otherwise, you're going to get some overflow. You're going to try to copy more characters into that destination than it can hold, and it will just run over the end, because that will cause a certain amount of trouble, but there isn't any way to stop it. Now, that can be used for a cyber attack. If you have a trivial bit of code like this, a little function that's doing a string copy into a buffer, just defined here as 12 characters long, and what you actually do is supply it with a string that is longer than 12 characters, then clearly it's going to run over the end of the space that has been reserved for this buffer. And this buffer, this is the stack frame that gets constructed in the memory of the computer for the function. Here's the buffer. And when you run over the end of it, you're going to run and overwrite the things that are here. Now, that could do all sorts of damage, depending on how big the string is that you've provided and how far it overruns. It may well cause things to crash. But notice that one of the things that is in that stack frame is the return address. It's the address in the program that this function is going to go back to when it ends. And if you overwrite that with something which is actually a valid address, the program will go back to that address, probably taking with it whatever privileged state it's actually running in at the moment anyway. So if we look at how you might use that, if your string is quite a big string, and at one end of it you've written some malicious code, in binary, of course, hex, octal, but not in source code, because there's no mechanism here for compiling it, but actually the compiled form of some malicious code. And if you then overwrite the buffer, both with a return address that points to that code and the code, now you're in control. Because when that function exits, it's going to go to the return address and end up running your malicious code. Now, it's quite hard to get that right. And so one of the tricks that is used is that actually you pack a large amount of the store in front of your malicious code with no operation instructions, or operations that simply execute but don't do anything and move on to the next one. And that means that your return address only has to point to somewhere in here, and it will run through into the malicious code. And that makes life a lot easier for you when you're mounting these sort of attacks. So that's the basic principle of buffer overflow. So lots of different forms of it, lots of different ways in which this sort of attack can be carried out, but nevertheless, it's that sort of principle. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, any system that has data inputs can be attacked in this way. Communications systems, anything that's doing data communications, taking in data packets, expecting messages to be of a particular form, of a particular length, can be exploited in this way. And here's a Guardian press report of an attack that was demonstrated in principle by some researchers who were able to actually take over the brakes, apply the brakes in a car by sending a text message into one of those dongles that are used by insurance companies to monitor the way that you're driving and communicate, provide location data in an emergency and that sort of thing. So you can run buffer overflows across all sorts of different systems, including quite a lot of safety critical and security critical systems. Now, there are lots of known vulnerabilities, and I'll show you some evidence for that in just a minute. It's very easy at the moment, anyway, to find devices that are connected to the internet that have the sort of characteristics that mean that you know they've got known vulnerabilities. For example, there are quite a lot of systems where there are default passwords, and most people don't change default passwords. You will find, for example, that many hospitals connect medical equipment to the internet for various diagnostic reasons, and that they don't always, perhaps even don't often, change the default password. So you can find online bits of medical equipment and know what the password is for controlling that medical equipment. And it may be an infusion pump, giving a patient an intravenous drip and dispensing certain amounts of medication as part of that. And you may be able to control it over the internet as a consequence of the password not having been changed. And the way that you can find these things is that there's a search engine for them called Showdown. This is the front page of the Showdown. It's again an entirely legitimate website and tool. It's there to enable people to analyze networks, to look at networks in order to be able to check the security, in order to be able to protect them. It's this sort of search engine that was used by the website that was got some publicity a year or so ago and was then taken off the air, which had located a very large number of networked video cameras that people had put up as baby monitors or to look after patients in old people's homes and nursing homes, for example. And this website was displaying the video feeds from all these children's bedrooms and nursing homes. And you could simply go onto the website and just randomly flick through large numbers of other people's video feeds because people had bought these monitors, connected them to their Wi-Fi systems, because that would be convenient, and they could check up on their kids from downstairs from their smartphone, or keep an eye on the house when they were away to make sure that there was nobody prowling around and that everything was all right. But they hadn't bothered to change the passwords. And so they still had the default passwords, and those systems were available to anyone. Now, that website's gone, but those video cameras are no doubt still there, many of them, and you could find them using Showdown. And if you look at Showdown, you'll see that there are lots and lots and lots of sample scripts available for doing lots of interesting searches. So, you don't have to necessarily even really understand how to go about looking for specific devices. Somebody else will have done it, and there'll be details stored there. I want very briefly just to mention another important attack, which is the cross-site scripting attack. This happens when an application stores some text which another user is then going to display inside their browser, where it will be executed as part of displaying that script. For example, a newspaper website that has a comment facility underneath it, a Cyberliving website that has a comment facility underneath the lectures. You get to type in whatever you like. If, as part of that, you choose to type in some malicious script, then if the software that is managing that site and displaying that information and storing it and then displaying it, then playing it back, doesn't sanitize that, doesn't check to make sure that it doesn't contain script, then what happens is that your malicious script will be displayed and executed by anybody who actually looks at that comment or reads or looks at your profile, if it's a profile on a social media site, for example. So you can very easily get lots of people infected with some malicious code by having it stored on a popular site that they go to and then look at this malicious code. And this is the process. The attacker sets a trap, enters some malicious script into a web page. It gets stored. If the application has got a cross-site scripting vulnerability, so that it's stored and then sent back without actually having been sanitized, it runs inside the victim's browser, which gives it full access to the cookies on the browser, which actually contain a lot of useful information. In particular, there's a session cookie which enables you, if you intercept that, in many applications, it means that you can take over the active session that user is running. If you've got access to the cookie and you know the website that they're talking to, then you can simply start running their session and take over their session by using the same cookie to communicate to the website, because the protocols, the handshake that goes on between the user's browser and the remote website, quite often those protocols don't maintain any particular memory other than the information about this cookie, and therefore it is quite easy to pretend that you are the other person. So having access inside somebody's browser to those cookies is actually quite a powerful attack mechanism. And again, this is the OWASP description of this. They go into a lot more detail. You can check that out. And they point out, virtually every web application has some aspect of this problem. They suggest a way of doing some checks. And the typical impact is that you can, for example, steal a user's session or sensitive data. You can rewrite web pages. You can redirect users to other sites, and so on. And I mean, what the cookie looks like is this. I mean, I simply went into the BBC News website, opened up the browser console down here, which you can do with a function key F12 on most computers. So you open up the console, you put in some JavaScript this JavaScript to have a look at the document cookie, and it's immediately displayed there. That's the cookie that gets stored on your computer as a result of visiting the BBC website. And nothing special about the BBC. I just happened to grab that because it was a quick one that I could have a look at. Now, how do people, professional programmers and system administrators, try to reduce the vulnerability of their systems to cyber attack? Obviously, it's a major concern. The number of attempted cyber attacks is going up exponentially, and therefore you just have to assume that your systems are going to be attacked if you're trying to manage an important system. And of course, the most common way to protect a system is by looking for the vulnerabilities and fixing them. This is called penetration testing, pen testing in the jargon. And of course, it's got the same weaknesses as we've seen when we've been discussing testing in terms of trying to find other errors in software. That testing can only ever show the presence of errors. It can never show the absence, because you can never carry out exhaustive testing. Not only is life too short, the universe has not been running long enough to carry out exhaustive testing on something the size of the software in a car, for example. So although they may run lots of attacks, they can't actually show that they've found all the vulnerabilities. But in order to be able to run lots and lots of attacks, they, of course, need access to tools that enable them to set up scripts that run lots of attacks, because you don't want to be sitting at a computer trying to do this one at a time and dreaming up the attacks. You want to take all the known attacks and run them against all the bits of software that may be vulnerable to them, and do it automatically if you're a pen tester. So, of course, there are tools for doing that, and they're extremely useful for people trying to defend systems, but of course they also get used by people wanting to attack systems. This is a popular tool, very, very good, Metasploit. It's, they claim, the world's most used penetration testing software, and I can believe that. That does seem, it's certainly the most mentioned one that I've come across. There's a free download, as you can see, so anybody can do it, and they have a library of known exploits. So they have a large number of existing scripts that you can then drive through Metasploit to actually run attacks against particular systems. Now, they're not the only website that is maintaining an archive of known exploits, not by any means. Here's another one. This is the exploitdatabase.com. It's an archive of tens of thousands of reported vulnerabilities, and what they say is that they invite people to send in vulnerabilities, saying, I found a vulnerability in this particular piece of software, and this is what I did to show that it is a vulnerability. They then publish it if the people running this website can actually reproduce the attack. Typically, it appears they publish them and then go through a process of verifying the attacks, and then they show whether the attacks have actually been verified or not. This is just one screen off their database. I did a search for buffer overflow vulnerabilities. They had 3,471 of the buffer overflow vulnerabilities. The columns here are interesting. This column, it gives you something you can click on to actually download the attack. This enables you actually to download the vulnerable application, so you can actually, if you want to, run that piece of software and run the attack against it. And this shows whether it's been verified or not, or whether it's still pending verification by the people running the database. And this shows the operating system platform that it runs on. And as you can see from the dates here, quite a lot of these buffer overflows were in fact added in this year. So despite the fact that they'd obviously already got several thousand of them, they are still being found and still being added. Now that's probably scared people enough. I just wanted to say one or two things about how you can protect yourself. I mean, strong passwords, obviously, and not reusing passwords. I recommend using software that helps to protect you. An awful lot of the software that we use makes it easy to make a mistake, to fall into a trap. And these are just a few of the things that I use. I use Thunderbird as my email client. It's got decent scam protection, for example. It will warn you if it detects that there is something on the page that isn't going on in the email that is not pointing to where it says it's pointing to, and it'll warn you if you try to click on it. It doesn't stop you doing it. If you've got good reason to do it, then you can simply do it anyway. But it does warn you. And of course, a lot of legitimate emails are sent out with that kind of structure, where there's a link there that says it goes to one place, and in fact it goes somewhere completely differently. The government does it. If the parliamentary select committees do it, because they actually want to know how many people are using the email and then going to read the page on the website that it refers to. So they reroute it through some software or a website that is actually counting the click-throughs and providing them with a report and telling them who's clicking on it and so on. So quite a lot of legitimate emails are in fact using techniques that look like criminal attacks. And that makes it a bit harder for us poor users to actually spot when something really is a criminal attack and when it's just somebody using the same techniques. I use Firefox as a browser. It's a good browser, but I use the NoScript add-in, which stops any JavaScript running. That disables almost all websites. Which is a slight disadvantage, but you can then look at the individual bits of the various sources of Java that it's trying to run and tell it which bits actually you're prepared to trust. And I find that actually I can use most websites perfectly effectively by doing that. It just slows me down slightly, but it's worth it. I use Startpage as a search engine. Startpage is great. It actually runs your search through Google, but it runs it from Startpage. So Google has no idea who you are. And that's great because Google's already collecting too much information about all of us. So it stops us doing that. I might next time actually show you the database that came out of the Yahoo search engine when they actually published a vast array of the searches that their user had produced, and just show you how revealing those searches are. That would be a worthwhile thing to do. The other great thing about Startpage is that when it gives you the links to click on, it also gives you a proxy link. So you can either go direct to the web page, or slightly slower, but you probably wouldn't notice, you can click on the proxy link, and that means that Startpage will go to the website for you and display what it looks like. So if there's any malicious script running on that website, it doesn't run on your machine, it runs on the Startpage proxy. So you're protected from it. That's pretty powerful. It also means that the website doesn't know you've visited them, so they can't track you. So that's quite a useful facility. And I also run a whole set of ad blockers and tracker blockers to try to stop people displaying adverts and tracking what I'm doing. And if you want more detail about that, ask me on the CyberLiving website, and I'll tell you all about it. There's basic cybersecurity advice available online. CyberStreetWise is one of the government sites that provides decent advice. There's GetSafe Online, which also provides a really good range of advice for protecting your own computer, yourself, smartphones, right through to protecting businesses, with social networking advice. Each of these then throws up a whole set of different links into different bits of advice. So it's, again, a useful source for how to protect yourself. And if you're a business and therefore want to get really serious about this is the basic advice given by GCHQ, by the CSG part of GCHQ, the 10 steps to cybersecurity. And you'll see the full URL down here. This is just a summary, but there's a lot of information behind this, showing the various different things that you need to think about as a member of a board of directors, for example, in order to make sure that you're at least doing the basic things you ought to make sure that your business is safe against cyber attack. So that's it. We've got a bit of time for questions, and when we run out of time for questions tonight, because we have to be out of here by 7 as always, please feel free to continue the questions and discussion on the Cyber Living website, where I'll be happy to do my very best to answer them. Thank you very much.